Okay, so if this is terrible, I'll delete it and start over. But I wanted to illustrate how the rock cycle actually works. So in our previous lecture, we learned that there were three types of rocks, right? There's igneous rocks, which forms from the cooling and solidification of molten rock, and that can occur within the earth, or it can occur on the surface of the earth in the form of lava. And then we said that there were sedimentary rocks, which I've just barely managed to get on the screen. And sedimentary rocks form from the weathering and compaction of pre-existing sediments. And then finally, there are, whoops. That is the hardest one to write. Metamorphic rocks. And metamorphic rocks form when pre-existing rocks are subjected to higher temperatures and pressures. So that's fun. But the Earth's history is really long, right? Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years. And so once an igneous rock, not always an igneous rock, things can happen, environmental changes will happen that result in rocks changing or transitioning from one rock to another over time. So if you had a sedimentary rock, like a sandstone, and you wanted to turn that sedimentary rock into an igneous rock, what do you think you'd have to do to it? All right, so actually the University of Syracuse has a really cool Vimeo channel where they kind of illustrate just this. They have a really high temperature furnace where they melt rocks routinely, and then they will pour them over all sorts of different materials. They'll pour them over ice, they'll put stakes on a bit of metal and pour the lava that they create over that. But what they basically do is they take a pre-existing rock, like a sedimentary rock, and they melt it, and then they cool it until it cools enough that it becomes a solid again. So you could do this process either with a sedimentary rock like a sandstone, or with a metamorphic rock, maybe like a marble. You could take a marble and you could melt it, and then you could cool it to the point where it became a solid again, and then it would be an igneous rock. You could also actually take an igneous rock, I'm just gonna abbreviate this as M and C in here, and melt one igneous rock and cool it under different conditions and actually form a slightly different igneous rock. So that's all the different ways that you can form an igneous rock. If you wanted to form a sedimentary rock, it wouldn't be too terribly difficult. You could take an igneous rock, like maybe you could take an obsidian, which is also called volcanic glass. And what you would do with that obsidian is that you would weather it, which means that you'd break it down until it turned into sediment, and then you would cement it. So if you weathered something into particles and then glued them all back together, you would form a sedimentary rock. Similarly, if you took a metamorphic rock and you weathered it into pieces and then you cemented it together, you would form a sedimentary rock. And finally, you could take a pre-existing sedimentary rock, like maybe a conglomerate or a shale, and you could weather it into pieces. Maybe those pieces get even smaller, and when you compact them together or cement them together, they turn into a slightly different sedimentary rock. So good times. So you can see where we're going with this last step. To form a metamorphic rock, you take an igneous rock and you increase the temperature and the pressure on the rock. So I'm abbreviating that T and P, and you do that enough that the minerals will recrystallize, but not so much that they melt, right? Because if they melted, we would actually just be forming a different igneous rock. We don't want melting here. So we increase the temperature and pressure to form a metamorphic rock. And we can do that either for igneous rocks, like we did in this portion here, or we can do it for a sedimentary rock. So you can take a sandstone and you can increase the temperature and pressure on the sandstone, which is called the parent rock. And when you do that, it actually turns from a quartz sandstone, which is sedimentary, into a quartzite, which is metamorphic. Similarly, you could take a metamorphic rock and you could increase the temperature and the pressure on the metamorphic rock and form perhaps a higher grade metamorphic rock. And this whole process is called the rock cycle. And it illustrates how over billions of years, any rock can be turned into any other rock. So we'll have a couple review questions to make sure that this makes some sense, because this is a really important concept in physical geology.